Hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. Welcome to today's OPA Lunch and Learn. Hello if you're new. If you're new to us, I'm going to explain. Going to take just a couple of minutes here, just let everybody join. Zoom can take a little while to let everybody in. If you've been with us before, you know that's the usual speech. So just give me maybe a minute here just to let people join. I'm just going to keep an eye on the numbers as they're going up. Again, if you've just come in, welcome to today's OPA Lunch and Learn. And just waiting for those people in the queue to be let in by Zoom. It takes a little while. We've got quite a few people registered today. So there's going to be quite a few to come in. And it looks like we're getting there. So that's good. In a minute, I'm going to hand over to Susan, but just in the interim, just let you know, some housekeeping stuff. The chat is closed. That's so we can concentrate on the Q&A. So the Q&A you'll find at the bottom of your screen. There's a little icon. Click on that, and that's where you can post your questions. If you want to, or if you can't find it there, you need to click the three buttons, three dots, and it'll probably appear from under there. So because this is a live demo going through for the hour, I'm going to hold the questions towards the end. So once, towards the end, we'll take time for questions. We may overrun a little bit of questions, but that's fine. So I think with that, I'm done. We have everybody in who's going to be in, and I'm going to bring Susan in, and she's going to do the introductions. Hi, Susan.
Hi. Hi, everyone. Welcome. I hope you've had your coffee or something to drink. Your brain's going to want to be fully operational for this as we take in Dominic Medici's demo and talk. She can really pack in a lot into a short period. So, you know, you'll pay attention for sure. And I'm sure you're going to walk away with a lot of inspiration and some ideas for your work in the future. Our individual style and message that our art portrays is influenced by so many other talented painters. And I know that Dominique will leave a lasting impression on you. I want to remind you all to book your trip to Charleston soon. Join us at the National. If you get in the show, congratulations. If not, there is so much to do. We have the wet paint competition and show, and you can go there and paint with renowned artists and network with them, and also have one of your items in the wet paint show as well. So along with learning at the convention, along with seeing some of the latest, my excuses here, seeing the latest in art supply materials and things like that, you are going to be in for a treat. I can't wait to meet you all, and I can't wait to enjoy the sights and scenes in Charleston as well with you, both out socially and also painting. I'm going to move on to Dominique. As many of you know, she is renowned for her portraiture in oils and egg tempera. She studied in London and she's exhibited internationally. She's won a number of awards from clubs and organizations, including OPA. And she has a passion for teaching as well and has taught both publicly and privately. Today, she's going to use a limited palette and she's going to break down a portrait demo into four main aspects and try to capture a likeness in 1 hour. And she'll do it, I'm positive. She'll explain the process so that we'll also get an insight into her plan and reasoning as she paints. So that's going to be a real treat because we don't always get to see the insights of the artist. Welcome, Dominique. We're so grateful to have you here today. Thank you for sharing your process with us.
Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Susan, thank you so much for inviting me to give a lunch and learn. I'm really honored to be here. And for Mark and Catherine as well for helping facilitate it. And everyone that signed up, because without all of you, this doesn't happen. And it's fun. Let's have a little bit of fun today. What I'd love to do, because time is of the essence, we should just launch straight into the demo, right? We have a little less than an hour, just about an hour. It's not a lot of time, but if it's used well, maybe it's enough, right? But you're gonna have to stick around to the end to see. Maybe I'll flop. Maybe it'll be a huge success. We don't really know. We're just gonna have to see how it goes. All right, so with that, let's get the easel view up and I'll show you the reference we're working from today. This is some of you already know this painting and probably love it. I am among them, right? So this is a lovely painting by Ilya Repin of a young poet, I think. It's at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. Often hangs in the same room as some of the Sargents, as he's sort of painting in the same time frame and more or less in the same style. So there we are with that. Let's see. Okay, so as Susan was saying, what I really love to do is I would like to paint this whole image in 1 hour. And if I didn't approach it with a little bit of a strategy, I think that could be super daunting. But one of the things that I teach is this idea of how can we break down something complicated into simple parts, and those simple steps build one upon the other. And something that is very complex can be distilled. And because of that, then it can be done quickly, right? So that's kind of the idea. It's this dance between detail and speed, spontaneity and discipline. And that's really the kind of foundation of the way that I work and also the way that I like to teach. So let me show you what we're working with. So we have a gray gesso panel here and a palette that is also gray. It's the same exact thing, just a panel cut in half. And I love working with those because then the colors I'm mixing look the same. As far as the colors go, it's you can see those on the materials list that Mark will attach. And as far as the brushes, same thing. I won't really go into those just now, but I can just show them to you. There's an assortment of flat and filbert and a little, maybe 1 or 2 pointed brushes for any fine detail. You'll see in the materials list that there's a link to a brush set that I have with Rosemary and Rosemary & Co., which are my kind of go-to brushes at this point. Yeah, great. So here's what I'm thinking. We have a little less than an hour and we have 4 stages to this painting process. So proportion, value, color, edge. So if we can, I'm thinking, if I can think primarily about proportion, because proportion's everything, right? So I'm going to start mixing up a color. And because it's a 1 hour thing, I'm going to kind of combine some of these steps, but I will talk through them as we're going, right? The first one is proportion. And my primary concern with proportion is the big shapes and the composition, right? And I like to use, generally I like to use a little bit of ivory black just to lightly sketch in and use a little bit of the Gamsol. So we have Gamsol in the left cup and linseed oil in the right. So just a little Gamsol, because then it's sort of like almost like liquid charcoal. That's the way I like to think about it. And I just go for the overall big shapes, and I want this to be pretty light, right? So the more time I have, the longer this stage is. The less time I have, it's more of a quick sketch, right? But what I notice about him more than anything is this strong diagonal, right? There's this sort of triangular shape, this lovely diagonal that runs right through the canvas, right through his body, through the desk, through the hands, through the books. Maybe it comes to here, right? So there are these really nice big shapes. And see, in a way, it's like when we see something, even though we're naturally drawn to the detail, right, and to the surface, what are we really seeing? We're really seeing the effect of those large shapes, right? They carry the quality and the feeling, right? And if we can just get those, even at a very abstract, simple way, in some way that carries the quality of, right, of the sitter. Interesting though, right? When you think about it, or maybe not surprising, because we've all had this experience of being at a, I don't know, like a county fair or something, or a crowded concert. And you're like, you're watching your friend run a marathon and you're just looking at this mass of people. But then yet at some point, something stands out, and it's the gait and walk and the proportion of that person, right? We recognize it. And then the details rush in to confirm what we're seeing. So in a way, see, I think about that a lot in the beginning of the painting. I really just want that feeling of the shape, of the big shape. And I think closer I can get to that, closer I can get to that big feeling, that big shape, the more that person in essence comes through, right? And if they come through in essence, then I think there's this much more likely that the details will fall into place, right? We've all had this experience too, I'm sure of it, right? With maybe writing, it's like when the idea is clear, when the idea matches the emotion that you're feeling, then it just writes itself, doesn't it? But then sometimes when it's a little unclear, we're not sure what we're saying or how to say it. Maybe it takes a little longer. So it's a similar thing with the painting. So taking the time and trusting that this first step is gonna, right? It's gonna pay off, in the longer run. And in a way, we end up saving time by spending time, at this stage. So that's sort of what I think, and or the way I work, the way I teach. And it takes us time to see the connection and relationship between things, you know, um, to hone in on these little angles. See, if he's sitting more upright, that's totally not him. This guy's doing his taxes, his 2022 taxes, and it's a rough job, as you can see. Look at him, poor thing. But no, I'm joking, but you know what I mean, right? There's a quality, and that comes through in these angles, in these big shapes. So spending a little bit of time, we need to warm up to it, right? Which is why rushing into the color, I think that's always, we end up slowing down. So maybe it takes us time to develop momentum in the beginning, but that momentum ends up really taking care of us in the long run. Right, so there we are. There's something of the big shape, and now I'm just sort of assessing it and asking myself, is there anything that is way off, right? Anything grabbing the attention, anything that feels dissonant when I compare this to the reference, right? Now for you all, you probably see it way clearer than I do. And I can hear some people saying, you might want to nudge that one way or the other, but right? So thank you for the support. But right, but it takes time. It takes us time to sink into the pose and to enjoy that. See, that's the funny thing about these quick ones. You would think you need to sort of, run and pant until you pass out, but it's really about slowing down and getting into a kind of flow or connection with the pose, right? That's where the magic happens. And, again, like I say, it's in the big shapes. So let's see. So I don't think this proportion of this canvas is exactly the same. So what I might want to do is just cut off a little bit of the bottom, right? And I mean, I'll just make the desk a bit longer, but my sense is the proportion's a bit shorter, right? It's a little more rectangular. All right. Big shape, I think we're okay with that. So here's what I'm thinking now. Now I want to start massing in. But normally what I do, would normally do in step 2 with value, I would mass in very thin washes to sort of get a sense of the light and shade. In this case, because it's somewhat of a flat composition, and certainly because we only have a little less than an hour, I'm going to go straight into color mixing. But what I'm going to be going for is the same thing we just did in the proportion stage. What are the average colors for each given area? And what is the harmony between all those colors? So there's something nice about this portrait in the sense that it's really what is it fundamentally? It's orange blue, right? His sweater is a dark blue, right? The hair reads dark blue. The background is light blue. The desk is orange. Fundamentally, it's a neutral orange, as are the books, right? Variations on orange, as is the face. So there's this nice, very simple relationship of that orange to blue. And in a way, there's a nice relationship between the color of the desk, the flesh tone, and the hands, as well as some of the books. So, see, the way I tend to think about it is I love to go for the harmony first and then go for the variety later, right? So that, we don't sacrifice anything, but we get that underlying um, uh, harmony that knits everything together, holds everything together, right? And again, it's a similar thing because, what are we really seeing? If we only have a quick glance, we're just seeing the basic big color, right? So I think that means that basic big color, like those basic big shapes, are the most essential thing, right? They're the most essential thing for the likeness, right? That's kind of how I'm thinking. So the average, it's not really as dark as the darkest bits. It's not as light as the lightest bits. It sits in the middle. And that's kind of how I like to think of it. So, right, and I think big to small, right? Big to small. So sweater first. I'm just going to mask the whole thing in. And again, big to small, but also thin to thick, right? Thin to thick. So I'm just, it's super, it might not read this way online, but it's super transparent. I can see the ground, and if I were to wipe it off, there wouldn't be much, right? But it will appear solid because it's uniform. So I'm going to mask in this dark blue. But again, it's a little bit lighter than it's ultimately going to be. And, combination of primarily the ultramarine, but a little bit of that cobalt teal, right? Just to shift it towards that slight green tint in the blue. And I'm just going to mask this out all the way out. Right, and look at this angle come down. Right, nice and thin. See, in a way, I don't want to commit to any of the colors until they're all in, at least in a very thin way, right? So, or the initial sort of block in, as it were, right? Right, and if we were writing, this would sort of be like, what are the main ideas here? And how do they look against each other? It helps us refine, helps us get into that. See, the desk, I think, comes over here. This is the thing, right? As we're working on this, as we get deeper into the process, we just become more attuned to what we're seeing. There's something nice about that, right? That's why I don't want to go, I keep it open and loose as long as I can, right? Right, until I have to commit. But hopefully by then I'm ready to commit too, right? Like things are worked out, they make sense. Now look, I mean, maybe it made sense to go a little darker with that so that we can mass in that same color into the hair. But you see, this is exactly why I keep it thin, because I've now just slightly course corrected on that color. But it just takes a little working of this into that color to darken and neutralize that blue a little bit. You see what I mean? Easy, 2 seconds. And now I can come up into the head as well, bringing that color in, right? Right, so one thought comes to mind. So even though you're right, saving your questions till the end, as they come up for you, type them in, right? Because that's when they're freshest. And I know Mark's going to sort of aggregate some of them at the end so that we, and the more basic stuff, he's going to point you to my website, to see sort of the resources there, like my, materials list, all that sort of thing. But do type them in, because I think that's the fun part at the end, is sort of like, the questions that inevitably came up during the process. It's fun to hear those, right? It's fun to talk about them. Okay, right? So I'm just, like I say, massing in for the face and head. This is just an initial idea. I'm not committed to it. Okay, let's get onto the desk. So I'm going to switch brushes. I like to keep my pools of color separate, right? But distinct at the same time. So the desk fundamentally is orange, but at a neutral, right? At a much more neutral tone. So what I'm thinking here is let's get some orange. Which one of the two? Is it warm? Is it cool? I don't know. It's sort of in the middle, right? And it depends what you compare it to. But I would say let's go for a nice neutral orange. And then we're going to neutralize by adding a little bit of blue, right? Which blue? Same thing. If we wanted to go a little more red, we could add the ultramarine. If we wanted to go a little more yellow, we can add the cobalt teal. That's what I love about a primary palette, is that none of the conveniences here, right? No ochres, no greens, no purples. You have to mix it yourself, right? This is like a self-serve, like buffet or something. You got to put the salad together yourself. What I like about that, though, is, what happens when we have to mix our colors all the time? We become very good at color mixing, right? We become incredibly good at color mixing, and very fast, right? Very fast. So, right, that's the real benefit. So I'm going to sample that to see how it looks. Looks too warm and too red. So I want that to shift a little more towards the green. So a little bit of blue, a little bit of yellow, right? And look, in the similar way with taking time with the big shapes, it also makes sense to take a little time with our initial color mixes, because the closer we can get to them at this stage, the easier it is later on, meaning the less correction we have to do, right? So that's kind of nice, right? We want to save ourselves the pain later, right? By just taking a little extra time now. But look, that also can translate to enjoying it more, right? Slowing down a little bit, connecting to the process. Like, I'm a big fan of this, right? More and more, like the year after year, the more I paint, the more I appreciate the wisdom of, all the ancient wisdom traditions in the world. It's like, slow down, appreciate it. Or, the ancient wisdom that we see in, all the ideas that we grew up with, like, the tortoise wins the race, right? There's some wisdom there, right? And it's like, this painting's going to end in an hour one way or the other, so might as well go slow and steady, and to maximize the potential for it going well, right? That's kind of the thought, really. See, now I think that's a nice balance. That seems like a nice balance of kind of orange, but a cool orange that could look greenish, but could still look brown, right? Like it's just right in the middle, kind of like that desk. And again, this is only the initial pass on it. It's just meant to be close, right? It's not meant to be perfect. So we're going to block that in, right? And again, I'm actually not going to elongate the desk because I like trying to stick to the proportion we see. So, right, keep it thin, block it in. That sounds like a good bumper sticker right there. Available in the OPA store. Keep it thin and block it in. How about that? The jokes just get worse, in case you're wondering. So, all right, so let's see. We get our desk in. There we go. You see, every now and then I'm like kind of leaning back in the chair a little bit. I'm just assessing, like, is it close enough? Okay, it's close. It's leaning a bit red. I'd like it to be a little more green. That's fine. We could add a little bit of blue, little bit of that teal, a little bit of the yellow, right? It just shifts it slightly into the green, right? I can just work that in a bit. But we're gonna move on, right? Because time is ticking. So it's 25 past the hour. We're doing okay. So my goal, right, just to sort of set these kind of, milestones, I would love to be blocked in the next 10 minutes. So that would leave 25 minutes for, right, because I tend to think, value and color, we're kind of combining them right now. And then the fourth step is edges, variation, detail, things like that. That's where all the fun stuff happens. So 10 minutes from now, ideally we're blocked in. Okay, now look, I'm initially gonna use this same color, only super thin for the hands and face, right? Just because I like it as this initial underlying sort of color, right? It's super thin, it's only with Gamsol, so it's really not gonna affect much of what happens later on in the process. So I'm not concerned about that, right? I'm really not concerned about it. If it were thick, yes, then I'd be, then it's hard, then it would be hard to influence it. But a thin pass, it works, it serves well as an initial base coat, as it were. And I think that's fine. Okay, let's keep going with this. Background, right? I really should have started there. The obvious thing to do. Nice big brush. Right, so what is it? It's, it's a blue. Cobalt teal seems like the obvious go-to, right? There's a bit of turquoise in the color. It's light, it's bright, but it shouldn't advance too much. So I'm gonna start with the very first thing, which is just getting the color, right? The right balance of teal to ultramarine. So that looks all right. It's got a little bit of that purple, but it's still leaning towards the turquoise. Second question in my mind is value, right? I always think every color really it's just three questions. And if they're answered well, the color comes out. So it's just what's the most obvious hue? What's the is it lighter or darker? And then what's the saturation? And I found this thing, I have to show it to you because it's the most exciting thing that's happened last year. Not really, but it wasn't that day. But here is a little color sphere, which I found at Blick. What I love about it is this middle one is just pure color, right? It's neither light nor dark. It's just pure saturated color. And then as we move up, it gets lighter on the scale. As we move down, it gets blacker. So it's just the addition of white or black that shifts these color up and down. But then as we move through, it's getting more, it's getting less, it's getting desaturated. And if you go far enough, you get to the other side and it becomes the other color. But this is color theory in a nutshell. I love it. I love everything about it, right? And those are the three questions I always ask when I'm mixing color. I just ask, what's the hue, most obvious hue, then white or black to lighten or darken, and then a little bit of color to adjust one way or the other. And it's amazing because if we use that, you really just distill color theory. And like that plus the limited palette is dynamite, right? Not to mention you save a bunch of money, right? So I mixed the full palette, like the kind of traditional full palette with this palette and realized that, okay, I still love buying paint because, it's sort of like an addiction, but I realized that, I don't need it. And when I travel, this is all I bring. And because I teach with this, in fact, it's all I use nowadays, right? I no longer use the other colors just because I'm so efficient with it. So that's the point. Sometimes less, with less, we can do more because we understand it in a deeper way, right? I think that's the amazing, amazing thing, right? The understanding is what makes it more efficient, but that's obvious, right? We know that in our own professions, right? The more experienced we become, the simpler it gets in some ways. Okay, It's a little too dark. Let's lighten this up a little bit. So a little bit of white, right? And there's a little value scale over there. So I'm thinking, what is that background? It's maybe like a 4, 3, 4, something like that. I use an 11-step value scale, and you can see it underneath the black and white image. It's close. It's not bad. It's okay. So let's commit to it. We can mix up a little more, a little thicker. You know, ideally, it's easier to use the palette knife because then you can really mix up enough. And because it's the biggest color and the biggest shape, might as well, right? So again, it's just the cobalt teal plus the ultramarine and at a sort of level number 4 value. That's too light, right? So we'll go a little darker, which really just means a little more of the original. Oops, that was a little too purple. Okay, that's back on track now. That's the thing, if you overshoot, is that an issue? Not really, you just go back to the first thing, right? So if it gets too light, you just add the original color back in, and all of a sudden your saturation is good. So it's hardly a big deal. Let's see. It's a little bit, again, it's a little bit too purple. We want that teal, that influence of the yellow to come through. I also don't want to spend too long on this because then so I'm going to kind of accept it if it's close, right? That seems close enough. Right? We always know that if we have more time, we would tweak it. But, you know, it's sort of like, you know, for anyone who watched the World Cup this year, you know, it's exhilarating, right? It's like you see these people, these players who are incredibly skillful. And, you know, on any given day, any team could have won in certain matches, right? So, because it's a sport, right? It's like your skills are up against nature, up against time, and that timer keeps ticking. And what's going to win out? It's anyone's guess, you know, because that's the nature of the sport. But that's also what makes it fun, right? That's why I like doing, right? Like I have 2 classes that I teach. One is called short pose, where we do this sort of thing, and one is long pose. See, in a way, long pose is sort of it's the practice. It's the, you know, that's where we take the time. The timer isn't the opposing team, right? Your perseverance and your observation is the opposing team. How deep can you go into the assignment you're working on? Right? And that's wonderful because the better we get at that, then also the better our quick stuff gets. And then on the other hand, right, the quick pose, right, it's about efficiency. It's about, you know, making good decisions and practicing that week after week after week. So I love that, right, for myself as a discipline, right, as you know, it just keeps me, I feel like it's working it from both ends, right, keeping the skills sharp and yeah, keeping the skills sharp and then at the same time, hopefully deepening those skills. So anyway, you get the point, right? Like if we just do the one, it doesn't get us where we need to skill-wise. If we just do long stuff, then we're not really developing that efficiency, right? Because time's never precious when you have unending amounts of it. It's that beautiful balance of the two, isn't it? But, you know, that's hardly surprising because those make the best paintings anyway. Like, what are the paintings we love the most? They're the ones that always are that beautiful balance of skill and efficiency, right? Or set like a complexity, but spontaneity. You know what I mean? So, okay, so there's our background. It's sort of blocked in. It's close. It could be a little more teal, but again, it could be a little darker. But is it close enough? It's close enough for today, right? You know, that's we have to make our fight, you know, choose our battles when we have limited amounts of time. Now, right, what I would like to do at this point is refine some of the proportion, which to me, right, it's like that face too wide. Can I get some of his angles working a little bit better? See, we're 35 now, and it's been 10 minutes. We're almost blocked in. Let's finish it off. So it's the books, which again, they're sort of a lighter version of the skin tone, but slightly yellower. Maybe that's a good way of thinking about it. So let's see. Yeah, they're yellowish. All right, so yellow plus white, but it's not so clean, right? It's not so saturated. Let's desaturate the yellow with a little bit of purple. I'm going to take a little bit of teal, a little bit of the quinacridone. If it shifts to red, there wasn't enough teal, obviously, but it should be a nice neutral yellow. It doesn't look yellow, but if we compared this to like a pure purple, this would look super yellow, right? That's how color works. It always in relationship, as you know, right? Okay, let's see here. Let's block this in, but let's keep it simple, right? You know, it's this massive 2022 tax receipts, 1099s, W-2s. Oh my God. I have sympathy, great sympathy, as I know you do. So um, let's keep going, right? Let's block it in. Look, even though this book is bluer, right, in the middle, it's whiter, or it's lighter and slightly blue. I'm still going to do it thin with the same color. Because again, I love this idea of go for the harmony underneath the variety, right? Good life lesson as well as a painting lesson. And then get the variety, right? See the connection, see what unifies everything first, and then appreciate what makes it different, right? I think that is a lesson to live by. And, you know, I try practicing that every day in my life to varying degrees of success, of course. Um, you know, we were joking before this started, like, you know, sometimes I feel like when I start teaching on Wednesday is when the leaf blowers, they come to the studios outside and that's when they fire up. They're like, oh yeah, Medici's teaching today. Let's fire up those leaf blowers because they're quiet and it won't make a difference. So, right? Anyway, get the idea. And then I say, oh, I must be patient. Must be patient. I don't want to blow my cover that I'm this sweet person. So there we go. Maybe these books are a little darker. Okay, good. The only difficulty with not hearing you all is not knowing whether you're saying, oh my God, these jokes are getting worse, or if you're laughing. That's the only thing I'm not sure. Like, so I just have to run with it and risk it. I'll just keep an eye on the numbers. So far, they're not ticking down. When they start ticking down, that's going to be my sign. Okay, lay off the jokes, buddy. Okay. But more seriously, I'm beginning to feel the pressure, the time pressure. So I want to block these in quicker. Let's just get something in, right? It's not going to be perfect, but it's going to be close enough. My goal is to eliminate the gray, right? For this initial block in. That's it. I just want to get rid of the gray. You see, I kind of would want to shave this down too, right? Shave down the composition. I painted him a little smaller. It's fine. That's not going to change at this point. Okay. All right. Now look, now that the block-in is more or less there, let's refine it, right? This is the second pass now, except for here, right? He's got some sort of like green pants on. It's almost a Viridian. Easy to mix with this palette, Viridian. Right? It's that, what did I grab? Teal? Or is it ultra? I'm not sure. I just did it by habit. What we see that similar color, right? That same, yeah, a little bit of the ultra. That same color we see here as this little felt mat on the desk. Okay, let's see, 20 minutes. You see, that's what I need to remember to not get stressed, right? When I feel that timer ticking internally, right? I've just gotten into the habit of saying, okay, take a breath, go slower. Because as soon as I start feeling myself going faster, I know that I'm not making as good decisions. And so it's like, it's sort of counterintuitive, but it's like slow down, observe, see the big picture, right? Don't get distracted. And that is like, it's, I can feel myself breathing deeper, right? It's like, okay, what a relief. And then it's like, okay, yeah, right? Like the ideal is like, the ideal is that we paint it once, right? That's always the allure, right, of the quick painting is that it was the perfect stroke put down. And that never really happens. Or maybe once in a blue moon. It can happen. But isn't that a wonderful thing to pursue, right? As a lifelong sort of quest of that efficiency, right? And really connecting. I always love this story of Chinese calligrapher who apparently spent like, I can't remember how long it was, but let's say 40 years meditating. And then one day, after 40 years of meditation, sat down with a bit of ink and drew a perfect circle, right? It's like, is that, just a fable, that's meant to kind of inspire and delight? Yes, of course. Did it happen? Possibly, right? It's possible. I think it's possible. But you see the point, right? It's like, is perfection achievable? Probably not. But is it worth doing anyway? In a way, yeah, I think so. Because it makes it interesting, right? Um, I think it makes it interesting. Okay, look, um, see, the variation is beginning to come in. So some of the darker tones, right, which is a bit of ivory black, a bit of cobalt, ultramarine. So that lovely dark blue, rich dark blue. Okay, see, that sets off that mid-tone. And now that color has a way of shining right out, but it worked well before as a nice average, right? So the mid goes down first, the average, then the darker bits come in, then the lighter bits come in. And all of a sudden, it feels more dynamic, but it was really just, you know, adding the lighter and darker aspects of the same color. So I like thinking like that, right? I like breaking the process down like that. Right, since I'm in this sort of second pass, beginning to bring in the variation, right? I can also be a little thicker, let the paint be a little thicker as I'm trying to kind of like refine what I'm seeing. Yeah, right. Trying to refine what I'm seeing and letting it be a little more established. Right, so that feels very natural. It feels like a very natural way to work. Very little linseed oil, but if I need it, I'll use it, right? I try to keep the paint pretty as dry as possible without dragging, right? So it wants to flow, but doesn't want to have glisten at the same time. It's that beautiful balance in between. So we get this nice shadow coming up the shoulder. Right, that shoulder pops out here a bit. You see, the first thing is just the big angle. And then on the second pass, as much as possible, is the refinement to that shape. So we notice this little bulging out here. You get the idea. Okay, nice. It's coming. Some of these folds on the sweater. And again, it's the same idea of big to small. Even for the refinement process of laying in the darker darks, lighter lights, still big to small. Okay, good. All right, so maybe we can maybe we can call it, maybe we just, let's push forward, right? Because it's 45, we have 15 minutes. So this is what I love it. I love the way that timer is like, once you, well, it takes, to be honest, it does take a while to get used to. But once you're used to it, it's like, I don't know, there's something about it. It just keeps you on track. It keeps you from overthinking things. And I love that, right? And what's interesting is like, it's the painting after painting, the month after month of working that way, that you begin to like get better at each stage, which means the whole thing gets better. From that point of view, like when I teach, one of the things I always say is like, forget about results. Don't even think about it. Just, it's so unimportant. The process is everything, right? Getting used to the process. And, uh, right, the process creates the results in time, right? In the same way that, like, researchers in the lab, they experiment and they come up with something cool over time. And then the product is there, right? That was maybe not the best analogy, but you know what I mean, right? Like let the results arrive out of the effort. That's the way I think about it. Unless it's a commission, obviously, and then the result is super important. But for us, for the practice, right? To deepen the practice, it's nice to really, yeah, it's really nice to, yeah, let that go. It's just practice. I think you get the idea. Okay, so I'm getting into details already, and I don't want to do that. So, hand. I just want to put in some of the bigger, sort of more neutral, kind of greenish shapes. So I see some of those, and what are they? Are they dark, mid, or light? They are mid, so they're kind of based off of, sort of off of, my palette's getting a little bit messy, but I tend to think they're more of a mid, so I should be mixing around here. And I just try to keep my palette organized, darks, mids, lights. And because all the variations that will be here, they're going to be similar in value. They'll just be super different color-wise. There's something nice about that. So look, let's pop some of those nice green notes that we see running down the side of the face, a little bit in the beard here. Love that, right? I'm using a smaller brush now, number 2, flat. I love flats. They're like little chisels, right? There's something about it, right? We're beginning to get a sense of where his features might be. Again, without committing, without diving into detail. Okay, I need 2 brushes. I want one with a mid, I want one with a dark. So redder, right? It's a redder version. The eye socket is mostly in shadow. So it's a redder version of the color we had here. Redder and more orange, right? It's kind of like if it were a tube color, it'd be like burnt umber, right? Burnt or raw, depending on what company you're working with. But look, super easy to mix. It's orange plus black, right? There's burnt umber, more or less. And, right, easy to mix. Right, and if it needs to be slightly more saturated, you can add a little more red or yellow. If it wants to be slightly more neutral, right, we can darken it with the black. Right, I like working this way. Really like it. So I haven't really hit it yet. Okay, there we go. That's the color. So value-wise, what is it? Probably 8, 9, something like that on the value scale. Let's block in the same thing for the other eye. Nice, right? Very nice. I'm just thinking big shapes. Remember how we talked about that earlier? Big shapes, big values, big colors. Even when we look, if we just zoomed into here and nothing else was here, what would be the big shapes? It would be what we're doing. what's the average light, what's the average dark, what's the average mid, right? It's a nice way of thinking about it. And we go for that, right? The detail, see, it's too hard to go for and too stressful, right? It's too high stakes, you know, way too high stakes. And it's better to go for big shapes, right? They're less, you know, they're easier to sort of, it's not easy to see though. Like you need to, like, we need to learn how to see big shapes, right? Fair enough, right? We, you know, as humans, we're very drawn to the surface, right? We're very drawn to detail and to distinguishing things apart, right? We're not really trained to, I mean, we are in a way to see pattern, but certainly when it comes to visual things, right? What do we notice? We notice differences. But once we're used to it as a process, then it's, you know, then it's kind of fun, right? We can sink into those big shapes. So, right, the beard here, just a slightly darker version of that same color, you know, this is where the, you know, in a way the beard differentiates from the sweater, which is slightly more blue shifted. Now we're slightly more brown shifted, but value-wise, it's still pretty close, right? So that's the idea. Now look, you know, it's like, is it going to be a great likeness? Hopefully. I don't know. I doubt it, right? It'll be okay though. It'll be a decent likeness. And again, 52. So right, technically 8 minutes. Technically 8 minutes. And I know we can have a little 5-minute extension if needed. But again, I love that challenge. So I'm going to speed it up a little bit of oil. Let's mix up that lighter tone, right? The lighter tone on the face. So that's, for me, that's always the last thing, right? I always want to do lights last and build up dark to light, right? Back to front, thin to thick, dark to light, hard to soft, cool to warm, right? All those things, all those directions. Okay, right, so it's laying this in. It's a cooler, it's really much cooler, isn't it? So I'm grabbing some of that blue into the color. It's almost like, it's almost green, right? It's almost a green in a way, that flesh tone, but there's warmth in it too. There is a bit of warmth in it, so I don't want to go too far with that. Let's see if we can do it. Let's get this blocked in. Right, so I'm a bit bummed. I don't think we're going to be able to get to refine the books. I like the books. I like how loosely painted they are. There's something about that. But the bang for our buck is really here, isn't it, at this point? And that's enough of a challenge for 8 minutes to paint this portrait. So, okay, we'll keep going with it, right? Because it's not just, right? So it's laying this color on and at the same time refining the shape, ideally, right? As much as we can. Interesting. Right, so he's a little more ochre, just slightly more ochre. So I'm gonna pull a little more yellow in, and again, it's that ochre, but that little bit of that green tint. So pulling in a little bit of the yellow, a little bit of the blue, just shifting this towards the green. Right, so again, my sense is like, there's a likeness that exists in the big shapes, right? So just these three, the light, the mid, the dark, And if we can get that likeness, we're, even if we don't get to the detail like the eyes and the eyebrows and things like that, it should still be something of him, right? Something of him should come through. You see, so I'm refining the shape. I'm also thinking a little bit about edge at the same time, as much as possible, at least. So that tip of that nose, right? It is more, it's a down, slightly downward turn nose, slightly lower, slightly fuller. Nice bump here, a meridian, and then the mouth, right? This is way too light for that. We're gonna have to mix a special color for that area, but right, we get that little bit of skin tone coming into the beard here. The ear, we're gonna leave pretty simple. Let's see if we bring that up a little bit, right? So the hairline and that shape, that little point here above the eye, where the hair, or the part in the hair. Hmm. See how we're doing, 4 minutes. That nose drops down further. He's got a long middle third. Right, taking on the whole thing in an hour probably was a little ambitious, but I think it's better to risk than to play it safe, right? I like that idea of just pushing it. And besides, it shows you the whole process, right? Um, which I think is a good thing. Okay, see, that's more like it, right? That's more of the range we want to be seeing. So we get lighter here. It's that nice neutral light right there. Face is too wide, right? So that background, I think, let's see. Background could come in on the left-hand side and the right-hand side. Just a bit, right? Just a little bit. And in fact, the beard, you see the beard cuts in front here too, which thins out that 3/4 profile, right? Let's bring that in a little bit. Let's actually build up the beard a little more too. Bring in the tone here. Let's see. 2 minutes. Right, we can bring that up here as well. Same thing, right? That forehead, right? Angles in as the hair comes down the side of the face. Love that. So that slims him up also. While we're at it, let's just indicate the brows since we have the color. Right? If we can get the angle of the brows, that might get some of his emotion, right? Right? There's a sense of just, it's hard to know the subtlety of that emotion, but certainly like, ugh, right? Like, ugh, might be the nice way of summing it up. Maybe we pop in we got to get a little bit of this down here. We got to get that lip color and the flesh tone that's in the shadow poking through the beard, right? Which is the same color at a darker level or at a darker value, because otherwise it jumps out too much, right? So maybe a little lighter. Let's see if we just get that little bit of a beard coming, a little bit of the mouth coming through. And the upper lip, or upper and lower lip, right? It's a pinker or redder version of that same color. So we just mix, right? That's how we get our variations, just mix right into it, into that same pile. Okay, a little richer, a little bit richer. Lovely, there we are. You sort of get the idea. And let's see, we're at time. Maybe I can apply for that 5-minute extension.
Dominic, that's absolutely fine.
Okay. Thank
If
you.
anybody does need to leave just now, you will receive an email in a couple of days with a link to watch it again. So keep an eye out for that. But if you do need to leave us now, you won't miss anything. You'll just get a link to watch again a bit later.
Okay. Well, look, I think it's risky to paint the eyes at this stage, but what I think would be nice is to bring up some of the lighter lights and some of the warmer bits in the face, right? There's not enough time to, and if the eyes are off, if they're wrong, then it just ruins everything, right? So it's just not worth risking it, right? And so what this ends up being, right, is a nice study, a nice poster study, right? Which means simplified form, simplified form, simplified colors, simplified planes, and that's good, right? So I think that's one of the challenges for us is like knowing what to do and what not to do when we're doing these quick things. And if we're a bit more time, I think, yeah, taking it on would be okay. But look, just a quick wash across those hands just to separate that shadow from the light, I think is kind of a nice thing to do. It only takes a second, right? So we get just a little sense of it. Let's see. Yeah, right. So some of the warmer bits, like look, through the cheek here, it's a little bit warmer. Well, there's a greener bit, of course, but then there's also a pinker bit. Nice, lovely little pink right here in the cheek. Let's see, what else can we do? Right, I'm just sort of assessing what are the most important things in the last minute or so, right? That maybe aren't there, that if they were there, would have a meaningful difference. So I think bringing out some of these lights on the face are nice because they give us a sense of the form, right? It makes the form read a little bit better. Yeah, interesting. Okay, right. So now I'm assessing, just taking the whole thing in. Yeah, with more time, it'd be really nice to build this up, work on the books, and generally refine everything. But you know what? I think that's probably a good place to leave it, right? I don't think we can do too much with the eyes, which would be the next thing I would want to do. Okay. Yeah, okay. So it is complete. There we go. So Mark, feel free to.
Okay, yeah, I mean that's we've got loads of amazing comments. People loving the commentary and the jokes, and they're laughing along, and lots of great comments about the process they've seen today. So we have some questions. Early on, Sandy asked the question. You were talking about going for the harmony early on in the painting. Can you define harmony and how that applies in this case?
Yes, absolutely. I'll make myself a little bigger while we also can still see the picture. Harmony, yes. So in a way, it's sort of, I feel like whenever we look at anything, and you really notice this when you compare different images against each other, we'll notice that there's a certain sort of key or octave, if we think like about music, that things tend to exist in. And so I try to ask myself, what are those colors that dominate the composition? And sometimes it's one obvious color, and sometimes it's a complementary set of colors. So in this case, with this painting, which would be different if we compared it to another painting, that blue to orange relationship is super clear, right? So that's the idea.
Okay, thank you for that one. Quick, simple question. So somebody's saying cobalt teal on the palette. Um, so is this has it always been there, and how did it gain a spot on your palette on a limited palette? What's the
Nice.
what's the purpose of the cobalt teal? So not confused.
Yes.
What's the purpose of it on your palette?
There were lobbyists that were just working on this for years. And, money can get you anywhere in this game. No, I'm joking. But look, it comes down to the color wheel, and that in order to get, the purest possible colors and the most dynamic range, the teal was like ideal. But the truth is, this palette was even more limited before. It used to just be CYMK. So magenta, yellow, white, and black. The problem is in pigment, or at least with my control of it, it would always tend things to be too cold. That might work for printing, but for painting, it didn't work quite as well. So what I found is I needed two other colors that would help get towards the warm. So that was the introduction of Cad Red. And then the ultramarine blue is, the nice counterpart to the cobalt teal, right? So as far as blues go, right, the teal leans towards the yellow and the ultramarine blue leans towards the red. And right, for the reds, it's obvious, right? More obvious. The Cad Red leads towards yellow and the quinacridone red leans towards blue. So there's a nice balance there. Does that make sense?
It does. Yes, thank you.
Okay.
Next question. So we had a few people saying they love the explanation about large spaces and taking it to each section. But a couple of people wanted you just to go over that again. Could you explain that process of how you deal with the large spaces?
Absolutely. So like compositionally, if we were to sort of draw, imagine if we had some tracing paper on top of the image, there would be ways of drawing like straight lines that intersect with key positions on the painting. So along his back is an obvious example where, his sort of love handle, hip area, shoulder, and head, if lined up on a straight line, would sort of hit the halfway point in the reference, roughly, right? So that for me is a key line that runs through the image. But the more we look, the more we see those sort of things. And that these things tend to mass into color and value as well. So, the mass of his sweater, the mass of that desk. What is the simplest shape of that desk? It's rectangle, it's brown, it's roughly 8 or 9 on the value scale. What about the sweater? It's more triangular, right? But you see what I'm saying? Like it's these things tend, when you step back, when you squint, a variation kind of disappears, and we begin to see how things are averaged or more related than they are different. You really notice this when you squint, right? More than anything. Okay.
Thank you for that explanation. So a couple more questions coming in. Catherine's asking, and you can probably just clarify if there's anything there's missing. So she's summarized basically that you started dark to light, thin to thick, cool to warm, and big to small. Is there anything else that they've missed in that breakdown of this process?
Cool to warm, I think you said. Thin to thick, dark to light. There's probably a few more, but big to small, right? Big to small is one. And harmony to variety is another. Yeah, I think those are the main ones.
Okay, which ties into another question. Thank you for that. Another question, which is somebody's asking, how can they learn more from you? I mean, do you obviously, I know you teach online.
Absolutely. Yeah.
What kind of online teaching do you offer? How do people find you, and so on?
Oh, great question. Absolutely. So I can just show you real quick, right? So basically, at DominicMedici.com, let me just turn these images off real quick. You can see my website, and workshops and classes. This is like everything that I'm doing will end up being on here. And so links to my, short pose class and my long pose class are here. But if live classes don't work for you for whatever reason, then there's also this option of something called replay, which is basically you get, those classes a month after, once they're over, for a significantly reduced price, and you work with them at your own pace, right? So a couple ways to, oops, gosh, where did that go? Okay, right, a couple of ways to work. But yeah, DominiqueMedici.com. And so one thing that I would love to do for everyone that is on the call, of course, is right, anyone who signs up for a workshop in February with the code that Mark will provide, 10% off, you get 10% off, but in addition, I will also donate 10% to OPA to support their educational efforts. Yeah, but I would love for folks to join me. We do the same, exactly what you saw is exactly what we do, but you get feedback, right? Everyone gets critiques.
Okay, thank you. I'm just busy clicking and pasting links into the chat for people there. So if you check the chat, people, you'll find there's links for the online classes, the workshops, the videos, and I'm just reposting the promo code for the discount there. So that's in there.
Thank you.
So we'll make sure to send those out with the email that you'll receive on Sunday with a link to watch again. So we'll make sure those are in there as well. So I think a couple more questions come in. Lee is asking, obviously you kind of explained why you didn't want to put the eyes in today and time being a major factor in that. But do you always leave that till the end?
I do. It's the last thing I do because it's the most important.
Okay, and
yeah.
And then, do you need to go back a bit later when the paint is set up a little? So is it, do you wait? Do you do it as wet and wet, or are you waiting until you get a little bit of a surface to work on?
Yeah, good question. So with these quicker ones, right, these single session paintings, I tend to just do everything wet and wet. But for the longer ones, I'll try to be more strategic about what I'm doing on each day. So I might do one stage per day for a long pose, right? And whereas with the quick ones, as far as I get in that session is as far as it goes typically. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. And I want to follow up actually just on the eyes. So on a very small painting like this, how do you go about the eyes? Is it the smallest brush? Is it a tiny brush? How are you going to approach doing the eyes?
No, yeah, surprisingly, it's still those bigger brushes. And the funny thing is, so when I start breaking that shape of the eye socket up, I tend to, anything that's lighter is the lighter skin tone initially. And the darker bit tends to group with the darker other tones like the hair. And so it's interesting. It looks almost, it's very much part of what surrounds it. It's broken up in the exact same way. But I try to simplify it. So the eyelashes, the iris, the eyebrows, maybe the shadow underneath the lower lid, they're all the same color and they're all knitted together, right? They're not separated so that they form one big shape. And then right at the very end is where that little bit of variation comes in. So maybe the upper lid is just slightly pinker, or the sclera has a slight bit of blue in it. And so then that goes on top. But that's that idea of unity to variety, is that, we can focus on the likeness by keeping it simple, but once that likeness comes through, then we can get the variety by adding those little subtle touches to change it. So yeah, that's how I think about it.
Okay, thank you. And it's so somebody's saying that they wish there was an extra hour to see more refinement. Obviously, with the online, I know, yeah, with the online workshops and the replay and stuff, they can do it there. But for example,
Absolutely.
if you have another hour, what would you What would you be focusing on within that hour? How complete would this be?
Oh my God, it would dramatically change in 1 more hour. I mean, do we need a part two? Do we need a part two? We might need a part two for this. So that's something we can talk. I can talk to Catherine about. But I'm joking and sort of serious. But anyway, what would happen? You see, the thing is, the momentum was built up, and everything's in place. The refinement is what happens in that next hour, and it dramatically changes. Like, you know, um, it becomes much more refined. I wish I could just show you an example of it. Yeah, it's where all that detail comes out. It's where the full expression, the full range comes out. So the books would be there. The variations on the desk would be there, and the eyes would pop out, right? It goes from being a poster study to a finished study, basically. Yeah.
Well, the Q&A is just blown up with everybody saying yes, part two, including Catherine. So yeah, maybe don't do too much work on that just yet, because we may come.
No, I won't. I won't touch it.
Okay. Couple more questions if we can. So Janet's asking, when do you use the synthetic brushes versus the bristle? And I'll extend that. Say,
Yes.
what does it give you? Why are you making those choices?
Absolutely. Yeah. So initial block-in, big stuff, I love bristle, right? Because you can load it up with paint, but you really have this ability to move it around, and you can keep the texture really alive, right? Love that. Love everything about that. But they're not necessarily super precise, right? Like, not always. Whereas the synthetic, once we're blocked in with all that big, loose, kind of lovely paint, then it's nice to carefully refine. And I find that synthetics are just great for that, right? Like, they're not necessarily depositing a lot more paint, but they are allowing me to get the kind of control and the refinement within what's already there, right? So, and it's the stands back and forth between them, which is kind of fun too. Yeah.
Okay, speaking of the fun side of things, obviously, so Janet's asking, do you prefer to work from life or from images?
For online teaching, I work from images just because it sort of lends itself better for that. But for, I've never worked from images in a workshop that was live. And all of my training was just all live, right? It was super taboo to work from photos. Um, I like them both. I think, now that COVID sort of forced this on us, I've come to see the merits in it. But I still love working from life. I mean, if it's live, it's going to be from life. So.
And then in terms of, thank you. In terms of, working from life, I mean, Ruby's asking, is there a particular pose that you recommend or you prefer for your sitters?
Well, I mean, that's a good question. And really, it's what's comfortable for the sitter. So it should feel natural and comfortable for the sitter, because you're just going to get more out of your model if, right, if you make it a good experience for them. And but playing with lighting, I think that's, something that's a natural, easy pose to hold, but then play with the light, bring the drama out with the lighting and the costume, right, and the setting. Yeah.
As someone that has sat for figure and so on, yeah, I can agree with that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Final couple of questions. So Kathleen's asking about the palettes. Obviously, this is a limited palette.
Yes.
Is this what you always use, or in other circumstances, do you have a much wider range of pigments on the palette there?
See, it used to be that way. In the beginning, I worked with a more full range palette. And then when I really started teaching a lot, and I noticed the kind of struggles that we get into as students, right? And how colors seem to matter and which green you had seemed to matter. I realized, like, oh, that's not the way. And that, distilling it, being more fundamental, would show you that all those greens, you can just mix them, right? Like, you just gotta get the right balance, and you gotta have the right limited palette, of course. So initially I did have two separate palettes, right? I would have what I worked from for myself and what I taught with. But that was like 3 years ago. And this is all I use now because I'm so used to it. And I feel like I can get incredible range with it. I mean, just like, when you look at the range of colors, even though this is an insanely chromatic palette, right? The colors don't get purer than that. Look at all those neutral colors on the palette. Like no issue mixing those and really quickly. When you think about it, it's like a chromatic palette can do all the earth tones and anything you want, but it can also do super bright stuff. But the traditional sort of earth tone palette is limited to that. It can't do these amazing bright things. So I love the range, right? And it should be that way, right? If it's a limited palette that's chromatic, it should be able to do anything. And yeah, so it's all I use. It's all I use now, just those 7 colors. So I have a lot of paint if someone wants, just kidding. Anyway, yeah.
Okay, thank you. I think that's about it. So with that, I think I'm just going to ask Susan Abmer to come back in and join us. There she comes. And I'm just going to add the spotlight. And there we go. Hi, Susan.
Hi. All I can say, Dominique, is wow. Like in an hour, what you did, I think just showed people a whole new world. And I think that's why they're saying part 2 is a great idea. You beat me to it. I was going to say that this does need that. And I hope we do that. I'm sure there's discussion behind already. So I'm sure everybody will look forward to seeing Dominique again. Thank you all for coming. Thank you for all the great questions, because they also open our eyes a lot to some new learning. We've shared the link for your sphere, Dominique.
Oh, good. Wonderful.
I don't know if you have anything else you'd like to say before I sign off.
No, just mostly thank you, Susan, for all the work you do for OPA, of course, and for Mark for helping run this thing today. It was really, really helpful, and for everyone who signed on. Like, I don't see you, but I imagine you there, and I love the presence. Even if it's virtual, and I would love to see you in one of my classes so I can actually see you. Yeah, so thank you so much, and Catherine as well. So,
well, great. Again, everybody, thanks for coming. Thanks to Mark. Thanks to all our staff too. A real shout out to them, because there's a lot of things go on behind, and the workload is great. So thanks to them. I want to leave you with Dominique's words, because they are really resonating with me. And that is, the process is everything. Let the results arrive out of the effort. So hope you had a great time today. Leave you with that. Take care.
Thanks so much.